barbecues, the beaches, the promise of a fair go. These aren't just symbols of a lifestyle. They've been the foundation of what Australians believed their country stood for. But in 2025, that foundation is showing cracks. Behind the headlines, beneath the sunshine, Australia is quietly shifting. The cost of living is climbing. Housing is becoming a privilege, not a right. Infrastructure is creaking under the pressure of relentless population growth. And climate disasters are no longer seasonal. They're structural. The lucky country? Maybe once, but luck runs out when planning fails. The real question isn't about nostalgia. It's not even about the present. It's about what's coming. What kind of Australia will exist in 2030 if we stay on this path? This isn't science fiction, just real trends, real numbers, and real decisions, shaping a very real future. So, if the next 5 years are simply more of the same, where exactly does that leave us? Let's take a look. Data first. 1. The population puzzle. Australia's population stood at approximately 26.7 million in 2023. And based on current projections from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, it could surpass 30 million by 2030. This growth is not being driven by births, but by net overseas migration, which has returned to high levels following the pandemic. In fact, over 60% of the projected population increase is expected to come from immigration alone. Meanwhile, natural increase, the difference between births and deaths, is slowing. Fertility rates dropped to 1.63 births per woman in 2023, well below the replacement level of 2.1. This marks a long-term demographic shift, where Australia's population grows older, and migration becomes even more central to labor force renewal and economic vitality. This means the Australia of 2030 will be significantly more culturally and linguistically diverse, especially in major urban centers. Melbourne, currently neck and neck with Sydney in size, is on track to become the country's most populous city, potentially exceeding 6.5 million residents, while Sydney may reach over 6.1 million. But this rapid growth presents hard questions. Can housing supply keep up? Will infrastructure expand in time? And most importantly, will the social fabric stretch or tear as pressures mount on jobs, services, and cohesion? 2. Housing affordability. If current trends continue, housing in Australia by 2030 may be even more unaffordable than today, pushing homeownership further out of reach for a generation already squeezed. Between 2020 and 2024, Sydney's median house price rose sharply to around $1.6 million, according to CoreLogic, with some forecasts suggesting it could approach $2.1 million by 2030 if prices continue rising at an average annual rate of 5%. Melbourne, meanwhile, currently sits closer to $950,000, lower than previous peaks, but still well above affordable levels for most first-home buyers. With similar growth trajectories, it too could break the $1.2 million barrier within the next 5 years. But it's not just home buyers who are under pressure. Renters are facing mounting pain. Vacancy rates, which dipped below 1% in 2023, have slightly rebounded but remain tight, hovering between 1% and 1.7% in major cities like Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne. Rents surged during the post-pandemic rebound, with Brisbane rents rising more than 25% between 2021 and 2024. Growth has slowed in 2025, but prices remain high and well above wage growth. If nothing changes, Australia is heading toward a deeply divided housing future, homeowners sitting on rising equity, while renters are locked out of stability and security. This isn't just an economic fault line, it's a social, generational, and political reckoning. And it begs the question, who will still be able to call Australia home? 3. The economic outlook. Australia entered 2025 with rising interest rates, persistent inflation, and sluggish wage growth. The Reserve Bank's monetary tightening aimed to curb inflation, but at the cost of increasing mortgage stress and slowing down spending. By 2030, Australia's GDP may grow modestly, projected to average around 2 to 2.5% annually. But that headline masks growing disparities. Tech, finance, and mining may continue to thrive, driven by AI, global demand for lithium, and clean energy transitions. However, manufacturing remains fragile, and services sectors, particularly healthcare and aged care, are under immense strain from staffing shortages and rising demand. By 2030, over 20% of Australians will be over the age of 65, and yet we're still struggling to attract and retain aged care workers. The government estimates that by 2030, we'll need over 100,000 more aged care workers than we have today. Meanwhile, full-time permanent jobs are being replaced by contract work, the gig economy, and casual roles. Economic insecurity could become the norm for younger Australians. The working poor may become a defining class. What does it mean when people work full-time yet can't afford rent, healthcare, or a holiday? In 2030, that may be the lived reality for a growing share of the population. 4. Climate change. In 2030, climate change will no longer be an abstract policy debate. It will be visible, visceral, and unavoidable. Bushfire seasons are projected to become longer and more intense. The Black Summer fires of 2019 to 2020 burned more than 24 million hectares. By 2030, events of that magnitude could become more frequent. Coastal erosion threatens communities from Queensland to Victoria. Rising sea levels and storm surges may damage property values and force some towns into retreat. Water insecurity is also looming. The Murray-Darling Basin is under stress, and rainfall patterns are shifting. Agricultural output could decline in key areas, driving up food prices and impacting export revenue. At the same time, Australia has the opportunity to be a renewable energy superpower. Solar and wind already supply over 35% of the nation's electricity, and that could rise to 70% or more by 2030, especially with big battery storage projects underway. But the shift won't be painless. Coal communities face job losses, transmission infrastructure lags, and if policy coordination remains fragmented across states and the federal government, we risk missing the moment. 2030 is the tipping point. Either we lead in clean energy, or we fall behind. 5. Education and skills. By 2030, millions of Australian jobs will demand strong digital literacy, critical thinking, and problem-solving skills. Yet the question remains, is the education system keeping up? Australia's performance in global benchmarks like the PISA assessments has been steadily declining. Between 2003 and 2022, Australian students dropped the equivalent of half a school year in reading and mathematics, placing the nation behind countries it once outperformed. This decline is most pronounced in low-income and regional communities, where public schools face chronic underfunding, teacher shortages, and limited access to support services. At the same time, private school enrollments are rising, deepening a divide in educational outcomes based on postcode and parental income. The system risks becoming not just unequal, but structurally unfair. Compounding the issue is a neglected TAFE and vocational training sector. While Australia desperately needs more nurses, electricians, aged care workers, and builders, these pathways remain underfunded and undervalued. Enrollment declines and staffing shortfalls in TAFEs are worsening the skills crisis. If trends persist, youth and migrant unemployment may coexist with unfilled jobs in critical industries. The result? A growing skills mismatch that could become one of Australia's most serious economic constraints. Without urgent reform, we risk training students for jobs that no longer exist, while failing to fill the jobs we can't live without. 6. Cities and infrastructure. By 2030, 5 of Australia's capital cities, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, and Adelaide, will each have populations well over 1 million, with some pushing toward or exceeding 6 million. But while the people are arriving, the infrastructure isn't keeping pace. Congestion in Sydney and Melbourne already cost the economy an estimated $19 billion per year in lost productivity, according to Infrastructure Australia. Trains and buses are overcrowded. Roads are jammed during peak hours. And key infrastructure projects, from metro rail to highway upgrades, are delayed due to cost blowouts, labor shortages, and planning delays. The federal government has committed billions to infrastructure through its 10-year investment pipeline, but delivery is sluggish. Many projects are years behind schedule, with construction costs rising faster than inflation. If this trend continues, 2030 cities will be bigger, but not necessarily better. Urban sprawl will stretch further into the fringes, pushing commutes longer and squeezing green space. Without major planning reform, livability could erode under the weight of unmanaged growth. Meanwhile, regional cities like Geelong, Newcastle, and Ballarat are emerging as potential growth hubs. But growth without coordinated investment in healthcare, transport, and employment risks creating dormitory towns instead of thriving communities. 2030 presents a choice: rebalance Australia or entrench urban inequality even further. 7. Health and well-being. Mental health is fast becoming Australia's shadow crisis. As of 2024, nearly half of all Australians had experienced a mental health condition at some point in their lives, a statistic that's steadily rising. By 2030, this figure could climb even higher, particularly among younger Australians who are facing a perfect storm: social media pressure, climate anxiety, housing insecurity, cost of living stress, and chronic loneliness. The broader healthcare system is already straining under demand. Emergency departments are overcrowded, and wait times for psychological services stretch into weeks or even months. GP shortages are widespread, especially in rural and outer suburban areas, and the aged care system, despite ongoing reforms, continues to struggle with workforce gaps and inconsistent quality. If current trends continue, out-of-pocket healthcare costs will rise, pushing more Australians toward private care and leaving lower-income groups behind. Preventative mental health support may become a luxury, not a right. By 2030, the very idea of universal healthcare, long seen as a cornerstone of Australia's identity, could be at risk. As access becomes uneven and the system grows more privatized, we may find ourselves asking, who can still afford to be well in Australia? 8. Political landscape. Public trust in government is at a low ebb. As of 2024, just 41% of Australians reported trusting the federal government, according to national surveys. Years of political scandals, stalled reforms, and growing inequality have fueled widespread cynicism. Many Australians feel their concerns on housing, wages, climate, and healthcare are falling on deaf ears. Looking ahead to 2030, the big question is, will public engagement rebound or will apathy deepen? There are two possible directions. One is a surge in issue-based political movements, centered around climate action, housing justice, or economic fairness. The other is a rise in populist sentiment, where voters turn to simplified rhetoric and strongman promises out of frustration with a system they no longer trust. We may also see growing political fragmentation, more independence, fractured parliaments, and increasing difficulty passing major reforms. By 2030, Australia's democracy could face a turning point, renewed civic engagement, or a deeper crisis of legitimacy. 9. Australia's place in the world. Geopolitically, the 2020s have transformed the Indo-Pacific into a hotspot of strategic tension and shifting allegiances. Australia's alliance with the United States has grown stronger, anchored by defense pacts like AUKUS, while its relationship with China remains fraught, marked by diplomatic friction, economic dependency, and an uneasy balancing act. As we look toward 2030, global power dynamics may shift dramatically. The rise of climate refugees could redefine borders and demographics across the region, creating new humanitarian and security challenges. Critical trade routes, particularly through the South China Sea, may become flashpoints, while cyber threats are likely to become the front line of modern conflict. Australia's identity as a middle power will face immense pressure. Can we maintain a principled foreign policy that upholds democratic values while protecting vital economic relationships? Can we shape events in our region? Or will we merely respond to crises set in motion by larger powers? In this increasingly complex environment, Australia's strength may lie not in military might, but in soft power, robust diplomacy, strategic aid, regional partnerships, and inclusive multicultural engagement. These tools could help build trust, stability, and influence. But their effectiveness will depend on our willingness to invest in them consistently and to lead with clarity and conviction. 10. Culture and identity. Finally, who are we in 2030? The answer isn't just statistical, it's emotional, it's cultural. Will First Nations Australians have a treaty? Will the Uluru Statement from the Heart have been realized or ignored? Will multiculturalism thrive or be challenged by social tensions? Will Australia embrace its Asian and Pacific connections or cling to a fading Anglo-centric identity? By 2030, Australia could be more confident, more inclusive, and more unified around shared values. But it could also be more fragmented, generationally, racially, and economically. That outcome depends not just on policy, but on leadership, on us. Do we build enough homes, train the right workers, transition to clean energy, reform education and healthcare, restore political trust? Or do we delay, defer, and hope things magically improve? The next 5 years are not just another chapter, they are a defining moment. Because one thing is clear, The Australia of 2030 will not be the Australia of 2020. The only question is, will it be better or worse? And that is entirely up to us. Thank you for watching. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think will be the defining moment of 2030? Share your predictions in the comments below.